So welcome to the Agile Strategy Meetup group, and a real pleasure to have you here. We met each other many years ago in the Guild Fest
Right.
and been on and off in contact on LinkedIn since then. So really looking forward to hear your story. And we'll do it the normal way with the time for you to present 30 minutes, 30 minutes around that, and then after that, open it up for conversation.
Well,
So
I appreciate you having me,
please,
Martin. That's a good format. So you want me to just go ahead now? Great. So,
absolutely.
okay. So I'm actually want the first 30 minutes to be interactive as well, particularly if you really disagree with anything I say. Now, there are some things I'm going to show that I'm not going to get into detail on, but I think we have time to have an interactive engagement while I put slides up to make sure you understand at least what I'm saying. And if you
Yes.
disagree, we can even have a little bit of engagement then because that's a great way to learn. And then we'll have 30 minutes just open dialogue with everything. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been around a long time. I've written several books. That's not even all the books written, but it's the more current ones. You can see from here on the right, I'm very technical. We wrote this with, I don't know, I think
Oh,
2009.
you're not actually sharing anything.
Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. I thought I put that up there. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Here we go. Okay, so let's go back. Just the title of the thing. These are just not random thoughts, but these are thoughts. And this is me. This is a book that just came out with Gary Rupp, Richard Nestor, Steve Pereira. He's the guy that does flow engineering. It's a really good book. And myself, Richard has got a lot of experience as well. Gary was the cheerleader, and wrote most of it, which is why he's up first, and then it just goes alphabetical. In this book, there's also something I call BLAST, basically an Agile Solution Team, which was a precursor, but is more flexible than Scrum at Scale. I created that at 2008 with a client. Anyway, you can see I've been around. I've done XP, Scrum, co-form Lean Kanban University, but not there. I was the first safe SPC trainer. And I didn't go to the signing of the manifesto, but I was kind of ironically uh, called back at the 10-year anniversary. And I say ironically because I never signed the manifesto. I think there have been some issues with it. It was brilliant. I'm not saying it would have been any better had I been there. Probably not. But it left out some things that I knew would eventually lead us to, I think, the situation we're in now. So anyway, let's get on with the talk. Now, I want to show something first to create the context for strategy. Okay. And one of the things I do is I look at basically value stream perspective. My whole thing is based on that. I wrote the Discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant Workshop for the PMI, and then I left 3 years ago. Disciplined Agile, that's the bigger piece. Value stream, that's what we attended to, and then consultant because it was about how to basically be a consultant. Amplio is my system, but the idea you look at the whole system. You've got looking at success strategy as you can go through. Everybody gets feedback. Everybody's attending to the needs of the stakeholders. I'll talk a little bit about this and you have some sort of value stream analysis. So I'm not going to go into this. It's a complex slide, but I want to point out four things here. One is taking a value stream perspective is important. Now, this was an interesting insight, and this is worth keeping in mind. I'm not going to kind of argue about it. We can talk about it in a minute or two if you really have a thing about it, but I'm not going to go into it. I didn't mean argue, I meant go into it. But around 2007, net objectives, and I say net objectives because several of us consultants came to the same conclusion independently that most organizations need to accomplish the same set of objectives. So, these are the objectives up here that for the highlighting. But then in addition to those objectives, you've got value stream management, how to learn, what roles are. And now this is not a complete list. And some companies, and I'm not going to talk about this during the talk, how you have to attend to it. But if you're an FDA regulated company, if you've got government regulation on you, if you're in the military, there are a lot of other capabilities. We call these capabilities, not objectives, but capabilities. Like I'm able to have a product backlog or something, or I can allocate in a lean manner, or whatever that is. But the point is that these objectives are somewhat common. And if you're in that kind of regulated environment or Maybe you got a health product that has super high quality issues. Those could be additional capabilities in the form of constraints. Okay, so I'm not going to go through if there's a complete list or not. If you're interested in this, check out the Amplio Community of Practice. It's free, and I'll have a link at the end where we're building this in more detail. So that's a cool thing. But anyway, the point is, most organizations need to accomplish these. I shouldn't say same set, I should say same core set. Because as I said, if you're in a regulated environment, military, things like that, it'll be addition. Now, this is what's kind of interesting, though. The relationship between all these things in most organizations is also the same. So there's a pattern of behavior here. In fact, that's why I use patterns a la Alexander to build this. But here's another insight. Actions affect downstream objectives. In other words, what you do here affects everything here. In fact, many of you have probably experienced a time where developers get blamed for something that happened way up early. And the obvious reason is, well, the developers had it last, so it's their fault. It's obvious, but it's not good. It's not right. What you do up here affects downstream more than what you do down here affects upstream, except through feedback. We do have feedback loops. But this is important. Why? Because look where strategies are. Strategies are right up front. They're not the very first thing, but you have to do some of these things. And I'm actually going to talk about these to get to this. Okay. So that's where I want to start. Strategies are both creating a context and within a context. In other words, they create the stuff after them, but we have to pay attention to how they relate to everything else. Okay, so let's get into more of the purpose of strategy. Excuse me. And here I'm going to try to open this up so I can see the chat as well. Let me move it here. So if you've got questions or concerns or just want to tell me something without interrupting me, and you're free to interrupt me, just put it in the chat. So what's the purpose of strategy? Well, I don't know there is a purpose of strategy. You could generally say to guide everybody, and that's true. But I think different perspectives are present. There's the executive point of view. There's the point of view, those are actually manifesting the strategy. There's the customer's point of view. See, customers will pay attention to your strategy, whether you state it to them or not. It's good branding, it's good marketing, but more important, they notice things. And you can change your strategy that might affect how customers work. So this is important to realize, okay? Who are our stakeholders? Now, I saw Tom Gill just join, which is great. And he's kind of my mentor. I highly recommend the session next week with him. He's got a very brilliant perspective on things. And over the last few years, he's been really drumming into me to look at stakeholders. So I thank him for his insights, but I'll take blame for any inaccuracies. But I like to look at three types of stakeholders, and they affect the strategies different. They're what I call sponsoring stakeholders, like executives, people who are putting the money up. Now, it's not the customer usually. If you're initiating a project to get customers, then the people are putting the money up to do it or taking it out of their budget. Those are the sponsoring stakeholders I'm referring to. Now, if a customer comes to you and says, you build this, here, I'll pay for you to build this, then the customer is the sponsoring stakeholder. And that happens, but that doesn't happen as often as executives or marketing people, somebody with budget, okay? There are consuming, these are our customers. They can be internal or external. That's not all there is. Sometimes people talk about agencies as customers, but let me give you a clue. The FAA is not a customer of the airlines. They are a constraining system in the sense that you have to operate a certain way. So when we're looking at strategies and the stakeholders involved, I like to look at these three kinds because that pretty much gives me an easy way to see who's important. Now, how do I figure out what the values are of these people? Well, one of the things I look at is what we call the strategic pillars. Okay, these aren't the strategies, but these are kind of what we'll use to figure out maybe the strategies. We used to call these investment pillars, and I sometimes accidentally interchange the two. By investment pillars, in fact, I think that's what we called it in the DAVSC. We meant, this is what we're going to invest in. This is where we're going to put our money because we're putting our money where our strategies are. So these are, they're typically unique to a particular business, but similar across organizations in the same business. That's not always true. Sometimes they change. Oh, initiatives typically come out of this. I don't know, I missed a little bit of word there. These pillars can be used to guide prioritization, except I shouldn't say prioritization because I don't believe in prioritization. But I use that at first because I don't want to get into this. But we use sequencing this, then this, then this, then this, then this. It creates the sense that you can't do everything at once. I mean, maybe you can do two or three, four, maybe even 10 things if you got a big enough pool of people and they're not slowing things down. But you want to prioritize. Okay. OKRs can serve this purpose as well. I'm not for or against OKRs. They're often used wrong, but I've known companies use them very well. Here's an example. So a financial company might have retaining assets, improving customer experience, lowering cost compliance, and lowering risk. And these are kind of in order and they're balanced. I mean, they're not the same. They can be, I think on this one, when we did it, it was like 30%, 20, 10, 10 was how it percentage. This is what the executives, the directors, the board would say, here's where we're putting our money. The reason retaining assets is so high is because you get a percentage of the money, but you're going to keep people if you improve their experience and you're going to lower your costs. Well, you're going to make more money, and then compliance will get you into trouble and you want to lower risk in general. This also might include one for improving internal processes. We find 5 plus or minus 1 to be the right number of these. It's not exact, but if you have less than 4, it's probably not enough. If you have more than 6, you probably have more detail. Think about it. If I got 6 things, the 7th one can't be more than about 15, 12%. So you get, this is not an absolute reduced to numerical equations. It's more of a, well, let's have something to talk about. Now, this works for nonprofits. Okay. I give to the Union Gospel Church in Seattle, and they operate a place, for homeless people. And their things is how many meals served, how many beds are provided, how much money did they get, what's the value of the non-monetary donations they received, how many volunteers do they have. Those are the main things they looked at to see how things are going. So this gives focus because with the strategic pillars, what you can do is basically come up with a sense of, are our strategies consistent with this or not? And these might shift. Actually, I'm going to show you a case where it did shift. At the end, I'm going to give an example where strategies can be shifted by some of the things I'm going to talk about. How do we implement it? Well, you might have your strategy. You might have initiatives. I have a more detailed graph in Amplia University, but I just made a real simple idea. And then what's the next thing you're going to release? The smallest thing, the minimum valuable increment. This to me, if you were to learn one thing out of this talk that would be most useful to you, it wouldn't be strategy, it'd be this thing. I have seen managers, executives, directors transform groups of 300, 400 people with this one concept. And believe it or not, it's missing in the popular Agile framework. SAFe doesn't have it. Scrum doesn't have it. I don't think Less has it. Steve Tendon talks about it. He calls it a MOVE. I always forget what MOVE stands for, minimum something, something, something. And a lot of consultants have it. But basically what it is, it's a clear description of the minimum amount of value that can be realized from the people using it. How do you build it? It's the set of objectives. It's not how you're going to build it specifically. It's not all the details. But I contend that while it's true, you can't figure out your path exactly, and while you can't figure out all the details exactly, you should know the objective of what you're working on, unless it's even if it's a new product, but then there's the risk maybe it's the wrong new product. But you should know your intention. You should know the value that you're anticipating to get from it. And otherwise, you're probably wasting your time. And I have case studies on this that where I did this. I didn't make a big deal of this for a while. And then I realized, Al, in the 80s and 90s, pre-Agile, I almost never built something where the objective at the end was that much different than, in fact, almost the objective at the end was exactly the same. It was the way I implement it was different. The details of the implementation were different. The way I got there was different, but my intention was known up front. Now, Minimum, because it should be the smallest, valuable. It's got to be consumed, consumable, not just a step-by-step way of getting there, an increment. And you could say you can also take this concept alone and improve Scrum by saying that instead of just increments inside the sprints, do minimum valuable increments. Focus on them, get them done first. So there's a lot you can do with this. It works in all these contexts. Okay, so coming back, the key is it's not a reason to deliver less. It helps deliver value sooner because it's smaller. It's smaller than an epic, probably larger than a feature. You get focused on it. There's a lot here, but I've spent too much on it already. I said that already. Theory to understand how to improve value streams. They provide this to you. You need the theory though to improve. So that's how we can improve our strategy. I mentioned sequencing. You sequence work in the context of the strategy. Um, I don't know what the straining is. Sorry, the strategy. Uh, this is important because you have different people asking for different things. How do you reconcile them? You can't take what this guy wants versus what that person wants because they want different things. But you can look at the organization. This gives you an organization perspective. Okay, how can we become better at strategy? So here was an example of this that I was at a client, okay, and they were actually in the situation where they were basically matching feature sets. You've seen this, like, oh, we have all this and they have all that, and we got more than they do, okay. And I had actually been brought in not to talk to the executives. I've been brought in to teach design patterns to the development group. But at this point, I was doing patterns and I was doing agile and all that. And the development group said, "Hey guys, Al, this is great. Can you talk to all of our directors and C-level folks and things like that?" And I said, "Sure." So I had an hour. It wasn't a lot of time, but and it wasn't that big a company, a few hundred people. A couple hundred developers, and then I don't know how big sales was. And one of the things I was clear these people were doing is they were building as much as they could get. Now, I didn't know if this was right or not. I mean, I'm new, so I talked to the people, and I remember the marketing guy was sitting right next to me. And as I was talking to him, I said, "Well, I said, what is you trying to do? I see you have these feature lists and you're trying to have the best." And he said, because I'd heard this, and this was why I think they wanted to why the developers wanted me to talk to them. I said, "Yeah, to get in the door, we have to have all the features everybody else has." Now, is that right or not? How would I know? I don't know. So there's some coaching tips I'm giving here. Now, I'm suspicious it's wrong because usually it's bloated software and that slows you down. And then you've got all this stuff. So I'm very suspicious, but I don't know. So notice that there's this dichotomy going on. He has an opinion on their strategy, which is to have all the features, and I have doubts about it. But see, if I ask him, if I challenge him, if I say my experience is that's bloated, what's his immediate response going to be? Defensive. Oh, why did we bring this guy in here? Have him take his coffee and leave us, please. So you can't challenge them, but there's something to investigate. So I asked him a question. I said, first of all, I wasn't sure if he was technical or not. So I wanted to make sure that he understood there was a cost. So I said, there is a cost to all these features. And he said, yes. And I said, okay, great. Now, whether he really appreciates it or not, how would I know? But I can't challenge him. You cannot challenge him. So then I said, do people actually, so I'm questioning all the features. So I asked him, are all the features really needed? And he says, no, but people need to see we have them in order to buy the package. Oh, well, that's probably true. But see, one of the things think about what I just said. You're getting slowed down because you have all the features. They don't really need the features. So I wonder, do they find out they don't need all the features? Because maybe they never know that. Maybe they always want. He said, no, yeah, they find out after a little while. They install the system and they discover they don't need everything. So then I asked them a question. So here, I want you to think about this because this is important. See, their strategy has been, we're going to give everybody everything. And I see a different strategy, but I don't know if it's right. I see that their strategy is slowing things down. I see their strategy has an immediate impact, positive, but people eventually realize that it's not long term. And that in my mind, what I've thought of is that, well, maybe a customer would like to know these people are going to stay abreast of the market. Maybe they'll even lead the market. Maybe the customers will want to join with a company that has all they need now and can add things when they need them. It just showed up in my mind. So I asked them that. I literally asked them, I said, would you rather be known as the company that has all the features available, but many won't ever be used? Or would you rather be known as the company having the features you need now and can provide newer ones? See, now here's what's interesting. There's a great comment I love by Edgar Schein. We don't think and talk about what we see what we are able to think and talk about. This question had never been put to him. And you could tell he was just kind of sitting there for about 30 seconds thinking about it. And he said, I'd rather be we're more nimble. I'd rather be we can get you the next thing. See, I shifted that strategy of that company just with that question. And the coaching tip here, though, is the way I did it. Oh, how about that? The way you ask questions that illuminate for them what they're not seeing. Now, if I go back to this, do you see how the strategy now of being flexible is going to affect things down here than the strategy of having everything in the market? So that's just a little interaction. Okay, come back. There are two other things to recognize. To me, if you have to spend time coordinating teams, that's an indication of a lack of alignment. You want collaboration, but coordination is costs you should not have to have. Now, let me give you an example that's funny, maybe, but and maybe not applicable. But you've heard developers are sometimes called herding cats. Have you ever tried to herd cats individually? Get them coordinated. It's very difficult. I'm a cat lover. My wife's a cat lover, and I turned into one. I've had lots of cats over my lifetime now. You get a laser pointer, though, you can hurt them easily. They just they love that laser pointer. So when you have to herd them, you're not giving them some guidance. And when you give MVIs, this is why I brought up that they can be used. You give them an objective and the why. It's up to them to figure out the how. And you have to understand the delays. They'll naturally align with other teams because multiple teams now have the same perspective. So that's one insight. Here's another one. Another part of the effort. You can give more autonomy. I'm sorry, I should have probably said, the lack of autonomy. So here we got the more autonomy. This comes from Art of Action. I've got a summary of this. It's actually out on the PMI because the PMI bought my IP years ago. This is a fabulous book, and we have about a 14-page summary. I'll give a link to you, Morton, so you can put it to people. I highly recommend reading it. We spent a few hours on it in our workshop, but the summary is
Okay.
great. Why? Also, again, so the coordination. So as alignment goes up, people know what to do. It's again the same thing. It's really the same issue. Okay, 4 minutes ahead of time. This is just some contact spots for me. One of the other things I didn't do at the front, but I'm in the process of, I think, changing how training is done, education. I have a 6-month program that you pay for. It's live, 100 hours of live training, plus 100 hours or so of recordings, plus lots of PowerPoints. I think people need to learn over time so you can learn in the workplace. And I just came up with this morning. I see I misspelled something here, but I integrate coaching because to me, if you teach something, but you don't teach how to explain it to people, it's like giving a gun to a child. It just can cause more damage than whatever it is you're trying to do. And it's really surprised me. Well, it didn't surprise me years ago, but as I learned this, when I really discovered this a few years ago, how important it was, I've integrated it. This is very important because otherwise you get this good idea and you're frustrating for the people around you because you're telling them what they should do and you're frustrated because they're not doing it. You need to know how to do things. Okay, I'm done. Questions,
Thank you, Al.
conversations.
Well, a few questions from me just before we open it up.
Sure.
And I think the second one you covered, but I'll still just mention it. So first question is what do you see changing in the field of strategy? You probably cover some of it on the way, but if you should boil it down to like a few observations, or do you see anything changing?
I'm not sure how it's going to change. I think the focus right now is using AI in two areas. And there is maybe a potential way. Uh, and it's a good question. Let me put this thing up here. Uh, the So let me talk about the two things that are coming up in AI quite a lot, because I think that's the biggest thing on the end. And we are actually using HANA Prodigy as our AI tool. We've just started on that. But one thing with AI is obviously the coding ability that, that AI gives you. The other thing that some people are using is to figure out how these things can be implemented. Now, strategies could be used with AI if you look to see across the market what's going on, and if you use it to get feedback. So I think AI might change strategy by giving us better data on what we're doing. But I think the real problem that people have with strategies now is organizational agility is almost non-existent from what I can see out there in the space. So I'm working on basically trying to improve that. And out of that, strategies can change in the sense that you can be more responsive to the market. Strategies don't necessarily lead the market as much as you have to be aligned with the market, in my mind. Now, if you're on a cutting edge doing new products, that's good. But, most companies aren't at that point. So when you talk about changing strategy, I think you have to define, is this for a company that's in existence and is uh, trying to just keep improving and getting bigger, or is it a company that's looking for, a small company that's nimble? I think that's why we have these small companies that are nimble that are taking over big companies because they have nimbleness, but they don't seem to maintain it sometimes.
Thank you. And the second thing, but I actually somehow think you covered it. The question is, if somebody is new to the field, how to get into the topic, and you shared some advice on how to discuss with senior leaders
Good
and
question.
help them see what they're not seeing. Is there anything you like to add?
About strategies. I'm not sure. I'm not what I would consider the best expert. See, we're all people are all have expertise in domains. My expertise is how do all organizations work well together, technically and implementation wise. Uh, I'm not an expert on like setting strategies in organizations, although I've been an entrepreneur for I guess 40 years. But what I find the biggest problem in strategies now is how do you connect strategies to the rest of the organization? Now, this I do know how to do. And I actually use MVIs in the process. So I would suggest that more than perhaps trying to learn strategies, how to improve strategies, connecting strategies to the rest of the organization is more important. Now, the reason I say that is that I've gone into so many companies where the executives and the board knew the strategy and they had decent strategies. But once you got past that top level, few directors knew it. And I mean, they had things, places to go look, and and I would walk in and I'd say, how does somebody find out about this? And they'd say, oh yeah, we have this. And then 10 minutes later, they would say, oh, I'll get back to you, which means nobody knows where it is. So it might be out there someplace, but nobody's doing it. So again, the nice thing about MVIs is they give you quick feedback. So my thing is, if you can get flow going, you can adjust your strategy. And that'd be my advice. If you want to learn how to adjust strategies, get feedback to see how you're going. Now, Tom, this is not an open invitation to jump in too long, but I see him here on the screen. He has a lot to say about this. So when he's on, next week, I would definitely come to that if you want that question answered. He's really keen on this stuff.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Al. Um, we have still a few persons left in the call. Anybody who wants to bring up a question or a comment?
And is there anything people disagree with what I said or anything that just went, because that was a lot.
Um, well, if nobody else wants, I have some questions,
Okay, cool.
which we
And then we can always
uh,
let Tom jump in a little bit too. Well, go ahead. Ask
um,
rather get questions
yeah,
first.
well. I know Tom well enough that if he wants to step in, he will be the
Okay,
first to tell us.
that's right.
So
That's true.
so I'm curious. How do you? I mean, if you think of strategy as an object, something you can hold, what does it look like?
I think you have to get clear on what your objective is and how to quantify it. You have to be able to know if you're moving toward it or not. Now,
Yeah,
quantification is different than measuring it. Okay. I took a long time for me to get that. Actually, Tom taught me this.
yeah,
Both that you need to quantify it and that you can you can quantify it before you measure it. Now, one of the key things, in fact, let me go to this slide here. One of the key things, and I didn't go into this enough. Obviously, you've got a lot of these. So you've got to ask yourself, who are our critical stakeholders? What are their success criteria? And what are the constraints? What are their values? So you can use those to help identify what your strategies are, and you can talk to them about it. And so the sometimes you get some vague stuff from the executives and the sponsors, but the product managers, the program managers, those people need to look at, well, what are our strategies to manifest the values and success criteria of our stakeholders? And even, I talked about constraining. It's not quite as clean as this because you can have a sponsoring stakeholder. They have values, success criteria, and constraints. Okay. So it's not, you're not everybody's constraining. In other words, all of these have constraints. Like a sponsoring stakeholder will say, okay, I want this done, but it needs to happen within this amount of time frame or with this amount of money. Those are constraints. But their primary thing is sponsoring. Consuming stakeholders, well, customers, they'll have constraints. Well, it can't be expensive or, it has to have a certain quality. By constraining stakeholders, I mean those people that's really pretty much all they're offering is that here are constraints, here's regulation, here are things of that nature. So I start there. How do you quantify? How do we know what we can do? How do we know it's an improvement? How do you talk about it? Again, one of the reasons this is important is this quote by Edgar Schein. We don't think and talk about what we see what we are able to think and talk about. So if you haven't quantified what's important, if you haven't quantified their values, if you haven't quantified their constraints, don't expect that it's going to be figured out. This idea that we can be purposely incomplete and people will figure out has got about 25 years of experience showing no, they don't. Myself included. I have a very embarrassing story. So I did in 1984. I did a project with fully automated, or mostly, I had a little bit of manual running the thing. I didn't have a test framework, so you had to kind of get them started. But I did fully automated acceptance test. Why? Because my code was kind of fragile back in the day. This is before I knew patterns. And we had success because anytime I made a mistake, man, bam, just like that, found it. It didn't find where it was. They were just wrapped acceptance tests. But if you're a bin programmer, you usually know that what broke was due to what you did last, with the exception of memory overruns, things like that. I thought that was pretty cool. 84 is brilliant. I had a major project that's successful because of that. Then what was the next time I used that? You'd think 1984, 1985. No, 1999. I've wondered about this. How could you do something so brilliant and not do it again for 15 years? The reason was in 1999, that's when I got introduced to XP. And I said, oh, wow, I loved XP because it talks about things that are so important that I'd even done everything at one time. I wasn't doing XP before because I'd never put it together as a system because I hadn't thought about it that way.
Mhm.
But in 99, they all of a sudden talked about it that way. And then it was like, oh my God, I did this 15 years ago and now I did it. And then for a few years, I wondered why I didn't. And it's because of this observation. So when you talk about strategy, what I would suggest, in fact, this might be an exercise to put together because I use collaboration boards and things. What are the things to look at? And in fact, I've listed some of them here. You know, see, my experience is people don't see what they should do. They only see what they should do if you're talking about it. So getting them to talk about it is the big thing to start with. So it's kind of interesting. It would make an interesting map to show how do strategies affect all of these things, just to create awareness. And then I would say when you want to improve your strategies, be clear what context is created by strategies.
Yeah. Any any questions you have for us? Otherwise, I can go on some more.
Well, I'd
Or
be
others are.
interested. Yeah, I would be interested in the people's problems with strategies. Are you finding that, uh, see, I'm going to suggest that strategies, not having good strategies, cause things like difficulty of alignment. I've already said that. That means people
Yeah.
can't decide what to work on. Bloated requirements. Do any of you
Yeah.
have bloated requirements? Don't coordinate well with each other, collaborate well with each other, and you can't figure out what to work on. Do you guys have those problems? You put it in the chat if you don't want to speak up.
Let's see if we manage to activate Michael, Ivan, and Ken. But if you don't want to do that, that's okay too. I looked at it for a while, and I think there are a number of like prototypicals, and you mentioned them in a sense. So I think the prototypical one is that when you work in a team, it's not always crystal clear how what you do connects to the higher level objective,
Yeah.
which is like a chronic thing. And then when you look in the other direction, the chronic symptom is a lack of transparency to what's really going on in the organization, like a
That's right.
frustration that you don't have the overview.
Yeah.
And for me, they are synonymous with what we call the strategy execution gap, meaning the disconnect between what's wanted from
So when
a
you have a
strategic perspective.
strategy that's defined and you understand the values that the strategies reflect, and then you're a developer, you can look at these things in in your company, and these are particular to your company. This can help create those insights. Strategies are not just about a direction the company's going. Strategies are there to create understanding for all the people manifesting it. And I think that gets lost, and part of the shortcut perhaps is the product owner role in Scrum. Now, the product owner will understand and they'll be the one wringable neck and they'll figure it out and the team can just follow what I tell them to do. That's called disengagement. It's designed for disengagement, not intentionally, but
Yeah.
that's what happens.
So, we we had Patrick Hoverstad joining earlier, and he was really well articulated around this, almost saying that with a double digit percentage of people, and it's higher than 50, who doesn't know the strategy they are working
Yeah,
with. The conclusion actually should be that the system is not working rather than attempts to fix
that's
it.
right. Well,
Um,
I'm glad you say that for two reasons. Again, one thing is we have to take a systems thinking point of view. I didn't maybe explain that enough, but when I look at value streams, I look at this whole thing. So when people down here don't know what to do or they're disengaged, it's not their fault mostly. I mean, there are some stragglers and people who are, no matter what you do, they'll be disengaged, but it's mostly the system is disengaging them, and you should look and see why. And then the other one is when you talk about engagement, Dan Mezek and I are two of the bigger promoters of engagement. We come at it from different angles, and it has caused sometimes a little bit of a rough thing at times between. But we've resolved it because we realized what we're really trying to do is engage. He had always talked about invitation. You can't push things on people. You got to invite them. And the reality is some things have to be pushed, but they're usually kind of in the form of agreements. You never push how to
yeah,
do the work. It tends not to work. So when you talk about engagement, though, see, I believe you get engagement through understanding. Ellie Goldratt has a quote I also give all the time, which is a comfort zone has less to do with control and more to do with understanding. And what he means is that you can move your comfort zone when you understand. And if you don't, you're going to just go back to command and control if you're a manager.
Mhm.
So the question then becomes, if I'm trying to get strategies, how do I get people to follow them? How to get people to use them? Well, they better understand them. And that's part of this idea of the strategic pillars, because strategic pillars are an explicit statement of why we have the strategies, what's driving the strategies. And explicit statements are very important. People misunderstand this, and it seems to have gotten diminished in the world, the Kanban world.
Yeah.
When David Anderson and I came out with Lean Kanban University, actually prior to that, we'd done the Lean Kanban, the Miami Lean Kanban conference in Miami in 2009. And Kanban was actually pretty well formulated. There were it's two kind of divisions of it. One he called Kanban method, and the other one I called Lean Kanban, and it's reverted more to Kanban method now since I left. That's why LKU became Kanban University when I left, because I'd brought the Lean. Uh, and the point was that what we both agreed on, though, was that explicit workflow was essential. It's not the workflow so much, but it's that you make agreements and you talk about them explicitly. See, here we're explicitly saying what's there. That's what quantification does. It makes it
Yeah.
explicit. This is what's of value, and this is how we're looking at it. And if you don't do that, you get misunderstandings. So again, then you're left with all these people, even if this is stated, they don't know what you're talking about if it's not explicitly stated.
So there is a potential other view to this, because in a
Okay.
sense it's telling in your picture that strategy stays on the left side and then you have activity on the right side.
Uh,
However, there is a I just finished the point. So
yeah,
there is a
please.
view that strategy is in what you do, meaning that by observing a set of activities, you can distill out of it notion of strategy. There's some idea in where you're trying to get things and how you're planning to get there.
So let's look at
So
it the three way. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stop you. Keep going. This
no,
is
it's
good.
fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So first of all, I don't mean strategies up here and effects here. Notice this right here, tend to the needs of stakeholders. I didn't say customers. Amplio is stakeholder centric, not customer centric. And stakeholders are the ones who are coming up with the strategies, the consuming, the sponsoring stakeholders. So all of this work is within the context of this, because these are all connected here. So that's one thing. So yeah, the diagram kind of loses that. But there's another thing, which sounded like what you were saying. If I look to see how these guys are working, the way they're working may not be consistent with what this is saying. So one way you can tell what's the real strategy of a company, the real strategy of a company is based on how people are working with it. That's also the real design of the company. That's the real system of the company. It's what
Yeah,
it shows up, not what the executives think it is. So if these people are working in a way inconsistent with the stated here, you have a problem.
yeah,
That's what like what you said. That would be another symptom to look for. Is the work being done here consistent with the statement here? Now, it could
yeah.
be the statement's bad. It could be they're not listening to it. It could be they don't understand it. It could be there's no way to get it across. And I find usually that happens because there's no visibility of it, because people have not attended to this obvious statement.
Very well. Can
Yes.
Ivan, anything you like to throw into
No,
the equation?
yeah, I think for me, it's like, I guess I tend to look at things now through a sort of problem lens. I quite like I think Al's mentioned it a few times, the problems that are there in the organization or the problems with X, Y, Z, whatever. But I think that's like, for me, it's quite a valuable perspective of things is what problems are you trying to solve and what problems are being solved in the organization. And it's just a different way of looking at the kind of situation. So all these kind of areas, I guess when you go to the next slide, when you looked at your different sort of OKRs and things like that, I kind of, just for a help for myself, I think I kind of like to look at just as a neat sort of, there's more of a dynamic sort of framework for me. It's like the balanced scorecard, right? The sort of
Right.
financial, personal development processes and
Right.
product output. I think that's quite, the dynamics that go on there to keep that sort of flow going
That's right. That's right.
is quite important, I think, for me. That's kind of just, it's a trick, right? It's just a framework that helps you think about things. But for me, it's, I guess for me, a strategy for me is like, what problem ultimately are we trying to, or set of problems are we trying to solve? And what problems do we need to solve to get there? I think that's the critical question of any endeavor, I think.
Yeah.
I know the word problem isn't a popular phrasing that people often like to think about challenges or whatever, but for me, problems are like, that's the thing that's going to cause you sort of dysfunction, disadvantage or death, right? And if you don't
Well,
focus on it, then you're really going to miss something. So yeah, it's just a different way of thinking about it, I think.
well, there are some things in the industry that I think are kind of insane, in that if you don't look at your organization and find out what your challenges are in the organization and how they're showing up as problems. See, and problems are like what you're facing, but challenges are like, well, a challenge has an objective. A problem has I'm trying to do something. And I like the word challenges because it gets us what's the objective. I can think of the reasoning behind it. But if you look at, again, most of the agile frameworks, and I think this is the reason agile is stagnating, is they offer solutions without doing an analysis of the problems and challenges. And then they define it, well, it's good for complexity or something. Well, everything has got some degree of complexity. So what you want to attend to is not just what the objectives are, but what are some of the common problems, challenges that are present. And that's actually what we do with this mapping. We have another form where this kind of goes up and these kind of go down, and you actually put what your challenges are. And I think what's really interesting here, definitely going to do this with a few select ones. Excuse me. People talk about mapping in the Amplio University. People talk about the mapping, but in this case, because strategy is so important, it would be interesting to have a slide where on this slide I just show how does this affect all these others, and then have another slide that shows how MVIs affect everything. And it's interesting. Here's another example of this. I just wrote a post about there are like 9 things pretty much I always do, not because I have a set solution. I just said don't do that. But it turns out there are 9 things I pretty much always do because they're pretty much either they're there or they're not there. So I'll look for them. Like if a company doesn't have an intake process, then you've lost control because there's no way to tell if you're doing anything consistent with the strategies. If you're not using MVIs, then I know you're overbuilding, which means you're working on some things that aren't consistent with strategies. If management hasn't been educated on flow, then they're going to overload things, which is going to mean you're focusing on a lot of stuff that's not consistent with strategies. So I can go through like all 9 things actually relate back to this and strategic pillars. If you don't have them, then you can't get strategies known to things. So you want to see how everything interacts with everything else, but in a way that you're not overwhelming, but you can see it at different layers, different levels. And I think that's important. And sometimes people will look at this and they say, oh, I mean, I got to do all this. And well, you're doing it all, just different degrees of it. So the question is, what do you need to work on first? And like I said, there are about 9 that are pretty much will get you started. Oh, I'm sorry, I'd gone off on this and then I lost what I meant. I'll give you another story. So I was a safe program consultant trainer. In fact, I was the first one outside of SAI. And I was made an SPCT in 2012 without even having taken the SAFE workshop. One of the conditions was, Al, you got to take the workshop. And I'd read through the materials. But the reason Dean trusted me is because at the time, Net Objectives and SAI had done the most successful large scale operations. And he knew I knew how to go into a company and make a difference. Anyway, I left later because I think SAFE's gone down the wrong path. But one of the problems I had in really my first implementation, I've written this up, and I can mention the company's Northwestern if you want to look up at the case study, because SAFE SAI wrote a case study. But what's interesting is they wrote the case study like they thought it happened or they wanted it to happen. It's not what I did. I did a lot of stuff that's not in safe. And one of the things I did was right here, was in the shared services arena. And what happened is there was a group of about, their shared services about 250 people, and there were 125 that supported the train, the agile release train we kicked off. And what was interesting is they had about 7 managers there, but there was one manager, I do kind of surveys and do like a little 360 assessment, who's listening to who. And there was this woman manager. She was awesome. I mean, she was almost inventing Kanban herself. She had no training, but she'd seen how you had to pay attention to it. And her problem is this, and you can imagine this. She's back here. She's got all these different people talking to her, and everyone is screaming their stuff's most important. I'm sure that's a rare event. It's never happened to any of you out there, but sometimes I'm just kidding. You have somebody back here and everybody's screaming, my thing is the most important. Then the question is, how could she tell? And it's not her job to tell. Her job to tell is way up here. So this is the thing sometimes people miss when they talk about authority and responsibility. She had a responsibility, but she really didn't have the knowledge on what the sequencing was. So the way we solve this problem, in other words, she needed to shift the vision up to here and not all these people at this level that were telling her what to do. So what we came to was this, because you can't say no. I mean, you run the risk of getting fired, even though she was well respected. So when you get another coaching tip, when you are being told to make a decision or told what to do further down the value stream than where it should be, you have to shift it. You have to shift it in a responsible, safe way. So what she ended up doing was, and we talked about this, we came to this together, and she thought, yeah, it was a brilliant idea, was when she could tell, sometimes you could tell this is important. I got to do this because this is our new thing. Sometimes what was clarity, there was clarity on that. When she could tell which was more important, she did that. But if she couldn't tell, instead of listening to the clamor that was coming her way, she would tell them, look, I appreciate you want this, you want this, you want this, you want this. I can't figure this out. That's your job. That's not my job. Y'all need to decide, and you need to give me the sequence of the prioritization. What I'm going to do when I don't have that, I'm going to do what gets more throughput here so I can get more things out the door, since nobody can tell me which ones are more important. Now, I'm not saying no. She meant to make it really clear. She wasn't saying no. She was saying, she was saying she wanted these people to make these agreements, to tell her the right thing to do. But to do that, they have to collaborate, and they have to go back to the strategies, and they have to use the quantification of the values of the stakeholders to figure out what to do. Now we have 5 minutes left, and actually, Tom, I would like you to chime in on something, because what keeps coming into my mind, don't worry, you like this, one of your favorite things. He has a phenomenal tool that helps you do this. And just mention it for a minute, but I would suggest that maybe, I don't know what you're planning to talk about next week, but you might want to bring that in, because the tool clarifies what is important and how it fits our strategy, and it does it in a quantified way. And for some reason, I'm having a mental blank on the tool, but you know what I'm talking about.
Impact estimation table.
Yes. So why don't you say that for 2 minutes, Tom? Because I think it'd be worth people, if you want to get down to the brass tacks of how to do it, he's the guy with that tool. I'm giving you the conceptual pieces to look at. And I think, Tom, I don't know if that's what we're going to talk about, but maybe knowing to mention for 5 minutes
Yeah,
would
I
be.
think so. I guess I will cover that when Tom is here. So given the time is so short,
Oh,
it
okay.
would be
So
okay
just
to
know
not.
it's coming, or I'm hoping Tom covers it.
And
See the chat. See the chat.
Oh,
see the
good.
chat.
Okay.
Make sure it's not a personal message, Tom, because I don't see anything. So just following up on one thing. So you mentioned about problems, and that's actually very consistent with how Roger Martin presents this. So he basically have 2 litmus tests for strategy, as I read it. So one is that it's got to solve your biggest problem, which connects to challenge opportunity. If you bend the words right, I hope you would agree. Also, one can be synonymous with another depending on how you wrap it up. And the second thing is that whenever you make a choice, the opposite has to make sense, meaning that it's got to be a real choice among realistic options. So choosing one thing will exclude other things.
That's right. When you talk about problems, I'll give you an example of something. I don't know, I can't seem to. There is a way to do this. This is a Figma board. We're in process. I'm building it, but I wanted to give an example of one way we do it. This is like still some details to go, but this top bar here is what you saw on my other slide, and this bottom part is that bottom part. And what we do is it gives you a framework to talk to people about their problems. You put little stickies in the middle, and you can relate the problems to the missing capabilities. And people can see this stuff when you talk to them about it, but they won't see it because they're not talking about it. So the role of the consultant is to make people see what's going on. See, what's very cool, this is a mock-up thing, so I can't activate it, but you can like double click, get a board. So you can imagine how much easier it is once you can have them tell you what the problems are, and then you can see the connections to the problems. And you know, if you're interested, by the way, more of this is where the Amplio community of practice is talking about it to some extent, but the heart of how to do this is really with the ACE program. Okay, and I see we're out of time, but I did want to show that there's more you can do with this. And like Tom can show you more about the impact estimation table just to quantify things about what you're doing. And people are barely touching the surface. They'll pay millions of dollars to consultants instead of paying a lot less money to learn how to think themselves. That's, to me, one of my biggest irritants in the industry is how to change that. Anyway.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Sorry, this Amplio community, where is that then? Is that something anybody can join, or is it just something?
Oh, yeah. It's like, you know, my website, it was on that last slide, so it'll be there. So Success Engineering, go to Amplio University and the Amplio Community of Practice. Okay.
Yeah.
And we're in the middle of a capabilities and patterns project. Oops, that's not what I meant to go. Oh, that's right. That's the link up there. You can, from here, you could also go, and I have the YouTube sessions here. So we've had 3 sessions already, and they're recorded. You see that. At first, we just talked about it generally. Now we're actually getting into creating them. You know, we are literally building the patterns and the pieces. Now I have it in a book, but I find that the best way that people learn is doing it themselves. So the first cut is people are filling these in. You know, what's the objective, why it's important, what happens when you don't do it, implementing, and then even a way a Lyckoff type of, not Lyckoff, Lister, way to scale it.
Yeah.
So
well, if you have
that.
some links to share, you can
I'll
use
send
also
them to
the
you as
meetup comment fields, or I can put them there if you.
Yeah, I'll give you all these. This is good. And like the true university you pay for over 6 months, and we go into it in detail. But if you just want to get a flavor of this particular thing, plus I have a lot of, I'll show one last thing, but I'll show the links. If you go to the university and you go to the curriculum, there are lots of, you know, lots of information that these are videos and things like that, or the YouTube playlists. You know, there's a lot of videos here. The foundations is this whole model of lean flow theory of constraints that goes over all this, that's underneath all this. So there's literally days of stuff you can learn here.
Yeah, you've put a lot of work into it. I see a lot of effort. So
I've been working on this basically for almost 20 years now. I built it at the PMI with the DAVSC, and then when I left 3 years ago, I've been rebuilding it from scratch to not just include, and this is really the biggest difference, is I've since discovered that the format of the training over time, a little bit every day, every week, where you can try it in the workplace, as well as integrating coaching, as well as integrating support tools, is critical. So it's more than just it's more than just how do I learn the topics, how do I convey the topics, but it's also how can I have collaboration boards, which I was showing you. I've got all these different collaboration boards that you use to work with people. And yeah, I think this is revolutionary. To me, this is the next level out. It's a lot of new concepts, yes, but it's really the format of learning and bringing learning into the workplace instead of the workshop.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Al.
Al.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
Hope
I'll
to
get
see
you
you soon
more.
again.
Very good. Take care.
Bye bye.
Thanks.